This is something I've thought about a lot, and I haven't made up my mind yet on this. But whether or not this venting, I mean, this is a mechanism of venting. It gives you the impression that you're in control. You're making choices that you otherwise don't have out in the real world vis-a-vis governments. Whether in fact it diffuses a lot of the tension and the energy that could go into real change. Whether in fact it had a pacifying impact, even if it has made people seemingly more angry, but they're venting as they're angry, and they're not channeling the energies into challenging the system. And coupled with that, and this is a worry I had from the beginning when people say, well, what's the consequence of, why couldn't governments go against public opinion like they did in the Iraq War? And they can, of course they can. So what's the cost? Well, one of the costs is when they know that the public really hates what they're doing, and they can't change the public's mind because they don't have control over the media. The bottom line is they're going to repress more, and they'll do it. They'll find they can have an election, but in the end, they're going to unleash the security services to prevent all kinds of organizations and limit all kinds of freedoms to make things more difficult. And if you look at public opinion polls since the Iraq War, in every country, the Arab public has the perception that the Middle East had become less democratic, almost in every place, rather than more democratic, because they see all kinds of things that are going on the ground in their own countries that are different, that are limiting, not expanding the freedom. So I'm just wondering whether this phenomenon between the government reaction on the one hand and the diffusion of energy through venting on the other is having exactly the opposite of kind of what was anticipated in terms of a path to more democracy in the region.
Oh, it's definitely, I think you're absolutely correct, but the last point you made, it's absolutely not a path to more democracy. It's a path to more sort of complacent, passive citizenship. But the early years of the Jazeera phenomenon and all the others that followed, from the mid-90s to, say, 2005 or so, that first decade, there was this tremendous enthusiasm for these media among ordinary people because they could hear these viewpoints, and they were critical of governments and critical of the US and Israel, the basic big sticker items that you've documented so well. So there was this massive turnout to follow these media, and it was a kind of a vicarious letting out of tension and emotion. So it was psychologically and politically satisfying, but it was a passive kind of satisfaction. It wasn't dynamic. And it made people actually more complacent because they got their kicks by watching Jazeera. Therefore, they didn't, like you said, in the old days, they might have gone out and demonstrated or written something or formed an underground society or something, but they don't do that. They sort of, by venting, getting this tension, this stress relief out, it makes them more low-key, less dynamic, more placid, more unlikely to take actual action in any practical manner. It doesn't have to be violent action, but even just political action, forming a group, writing a letter to a newspaper, or something like that. The interesting thing is, from the government perspective, this is a phenomenon that I think most governments are happy with, because most citizens now are more pacified. The other part of that process is that citizens are given other opportunities to engage with, and the main one now, which I believe is the critical issue in the weakness of Arab citizenship, is Arab governments are basically telling their citizens to go shopping, to go to the mall, go shopping. Citizens have been turned into consumers in the Arab world.